This week on the Frame Savers. Thanks,
Don't have
Brian.
a cow, man.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Hey, me.
Don't have a cow, man.
This is episode 56 of the Frame Savers, and we are doing a surprise live episode on my stream for some reason, and that's pretty fun. That's pretty exciting. We have people in chat watching us live, seeing the process, seeing how the sausage is made. This week we are doing our 8th Bad Games episode. We have not done one of these in months.
It's been so long. 15 episodes since our last Bad Games episode. The previous one, if you can remember, was episode 41 with Wanda Gamelon and Faces of Evil.
Yeah, that's like half a year ago almost. Like a third of the year? Yeah. I mean, that's
a really long. That's 30 weeks.
This is our bread and butter right here.
Yeah.
These are the games only we will talk about.
It was actually really funny going back and looking at the episode list because I realized that over the course of like 2 months we did 4 Bad Games episodes and then we just stopped. We just stopped entirely. Yeah,
we've been doing all these good games and wasting everybody's time, so I apologize for that. So this is a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. If you're not aware of what speedrunning is, it is the hobby of trying to beat video games as quickly as possible. If you're new to the podcast, go check out episode 0. We go through a lot of the basic terminology and concepts that go into speedrunning that can help you out. Before we dive into this episode, though, Chad, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking. You know, I've really just had a lot on my mind, and I wanted to take this time to talk it out.
Okay. What do you want to talk about?
I'm kind of addicted to the Mummy for Game Boy Color, and I think that it's a problem.
That's a sentence that's probably literally never been uttered on this planet until this moment. So, you know, history's being made. That's great. Well, that's good. You enjoying speedrunning it?
Well, I'm just routing it right now, but I really enjoy routing. Unfortunately, last night, I felt like I made a lot of progress. I made it through like 9 levels, and then I looked at the list of levels and realized that there were still 37 to go. So it's not a short game, and I think it's going to be a problem. But it's been pretty good. I just got done also playing Bubsy 1 for a friend's birthday stream. He was doing Bubsathon, so he got all the people who speedrun Bubsy games to play Bubsy games. And since no one in our friend group plays Bubsy 1 and someone already plays Bubsy 3D, I got relegated to Bubsy 1, so that was fun.
Nice. You've been doing a bunch of other speedrunning too, I feel like, since our last episode. Some sort of weird weird adventure game.
I've been jumping around a lot. Yeah, I did... Let's see, I did Laura Bow's The Colonel's Bequest, which is a classic Sierra game that I think doesn't get a lot of love. But I was compelled to play the game by a viewer in my chat, DSF, and he had me play it. And then after I got done playing it, I was like, well, might as well speedrun it. And then I realized that the game has a really interesting mechanic where based on how much information you gather about the mystery, it's a mystery game, how much information you gather about the mystery, it gives you a rating. And the only way to get the best rating is to literally gather every piece of information. And so routing that out as a speedrun became a little project for me over the course of about a week. It was pretty fun. Cool. It was surprising how challenging it was to actually properly route it out. So it turned out to be more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Awesome. Yeah, I have been doing very little speedrunning, unfortunately. I have been doing a bunch of spring cleaning for like 6 days straight, so I kind of took a little break from streaming, but I did just do commentary for the Tiny 10, which happened, that we were promoting previously, so that just happened on Saturday. That was a lot of fun, and I've been doing a little bit of Game Boy Quest, trying to catch up because I've neglected that for some time, and I do want to start running a bunch of Game Boy games. I have a list of games that I kind of just want to get a run in, so excited to do that. Other than that, mostly FF7 and stuff of the like. But
yeah, I was out of town yesterday, so I unfortunately didn't get to participate in the Tiny 10, but I did actually get an opportunity to watch at least about the first hour of it, and it was really neat finally seeing one of those multi-game marathons where the games were played in their entirety rather than just being short goals.
Yep.
It was really cool seeing that for a change, and there was a really strong selection of games, I think. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I think it went really well.
Yeah, do we have any events coming up? There's none on our list, so I don't think so.
Yeah, nothing offhand that we know about, but I guess this is as good an opportunity as any to remind people that if you want us to mention your event on our podcast, we're always happy to plug events going on in the community. It's very exciting for us to be able to let people people know what's actually going on. So this is just our friendly reminder that if you have an event you want us to know about, you can tweet at us, you can email us, you can tell us in our Discord, and more often than not, we're happy to support all of the great goings on in the speedrunning community.
Absolutely. So this is a Bad Games episode. People listening to this maybe haven't heard a Bad Games episode because it's been so long. That is possible. It is possible you were born since the last Bad Games episode and got into podcasts and haven't heard number 7 or before. But why do we talk about Bad Games? What's the deal with this
Well,
series?
I think that more than most other people, you and I have a unique appreciation for bad games. I definitely have a pretty strong tie to the Kusoge community. We have a nice little community of people who really focus on speedrunning bad video games, and you speedrun a lot of Game Boy stuff, so you speedrun inherently terrible games.
Wow.
Sorry, you were the one who says you hate Game Boy games. So
I love Game Boy games. How dare you?
I don't think that that's what you said. But in general, I think you and I have a real ability to gather what's actually interesting about games, not necessarily getting too bogged down in whether or not a game is traditionally good or bad, but you and I find the best in them. So it's nice to be able to talk about these games and not really focus on, oh, well, it's just kind of boring, it's kind of bad. You know, speedrunning really does make a lot of these games better.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The thing that I think we bring to the table that I guess other podcasts might not, that are even interested in bad games when they talk about it. People might enjoy these games for their novelty, but adding speedrunning to them does add an element where a bad game can become good, a good game can become bad, etc. This week we're talking about 2 Simpsons games, which is a show I loved quite a bit as a kid. I wouldn't necessarily say the speedrun makes either of these games much more interesting, but you know, that's not always a requirement for us to talk about them. So I'm really excited to dive into these games. We're going to take a quick break. I don't know how many music breaks we're going to have of the same song, but enjoy that. Do you want to put the time
From the podcast
down?
that brought you Bad Games 2, which included Barbie Supermodel and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, what a weird episode that was.
All right, I'll throw the timestamp in there.
Okay, you want me to do this part?
If you want to just lead it off. You've got a vision for what you're doing,
Yeah. So this week we're going to be talking about 2 Simpsons games. We're going to be talking about Bart versus the World for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and we're going to be talking about Escape from Camp Deadly, which is a Game Boy title. But before we dive into that, just wanted to touch base on The Simpsons real quick. I mean, you could not just do like a podcast on The Simpsons. Like, there are podcasts out there that literally go through every single episode of The Simpsons. Actually, ironically, there's a retro video game podcast called Retronauts, and some of the members of Retronauts do another podcast called Talking Simpsons, where they do an episode on each episode of The Simpsons.
It's almost like there's an implicit crossover between The Simpsons and retro video gaming. Yeah. It's a match made in heaven.
And there's also just like, I mean, there's so much to talk about. I mean, I'm not going to give much of a history of The Simpsons, but if you're not aware, it's an American sitcom. It was created by Matt Groening, and it's a Fox show, and it's a satirical depiction of an American family, and it's basically the kind of was groundbreaking in terms of being the first of its kind. It's really like the reason that South Park exists, for example. This concept of creating a whole universe of cartoon characters, not just your main characters, but just a whole town filled with different characters that have different personalities and different effects. And because of that, you know, every Simpsons character is pretty memorable. Between, you know, you've got your main characters like Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, but then you also have, you know, Moe the bartender, you have Krusty the Clown, you have just all these different bit characters, and that kind of comes together to make this world, which is pretty cool. And it's famously, it debuted in December 17th, 1989. It's had 624 episodes, which is insane. And it's still going today. They are still making new episodes, which blows my mind because I remember in 7th or 8th grade, because I used to be a huge Simpsons fan when I was a kid. In 7th or 8th grade, this is 1998 about, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of done with this show. Like, I don't need to see any more of this. And yet, since that time, you know, what's 20-something years later, still plugging along with new episodes. So I don't know. I grew up loving this show, so I figured we could maybe just talk about that real quick. Did you grow up watching The Simpsons or?
Yeah, I watched it when I was younger. I mean, The Simpsons, as with a lot of shows of its kind, went through a transition partway through its lifetime where it stopped focusing so much on situational comedy and more became a commentary on current events.
Yep.
And I mean, obviously, South Park started way after it and transitioned almost immediately out of its infancy straight into political slash current events commentary.
Yep.
But I feel like Simpsons took a lot longer to get to that point where they really ran out of content.
For sure.
I wouldn't say ran out of content, but sort of switched style. I definitely haven't watched as much since they switched styles, so I watched it a little bit growing up. I think it was sort of the classic Atomic Family for me, where I grew up and my dad liked the show and I wanted to watch it with him, and my mom didn't like the show and tried to discourage me from watching it with him. I feel like there's probably a lot of people who have a similar story of their mom didn't want them to watch it and their dad was anyway. So
yeah, I think there's also a lot of I was always the kid whose parents let him watch like rated R movies and stuff, and I always had the friends who like would watch them at my house when they weren't supposed to, and like I remember I had plenty of friends who were not allowed to watch The Simpsons, so that was like a cool thing to be able to watch it. I mean, I also speaking about just video games, I grew up loving the Simpsons arcade game. It's my favorite arcade game probably ever. I loved it's probably really the only arcade game I truly remember like getting excited to play, and like just seeing it in arcade and being, you know, just real amped up. It's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. The art style's really good. Like it just looks and plays awesome. I haven't played it since then. It might not be great anymore.
You can find it. You were able to find it so often back in that era.
Yep.
So it was like there was no shortage of it, and it was always fun to play with your friends. I mean, it had 4 players, which was maybe less common at the time. Actually, having four individual controls to choose from. So it was awesome. I definitely remember that growing up, finding that in the arcades. If I ever went to an arcade that I didn't know, I always hunted that game down first.
Yeah, absolutely. That and Tekken I played probably the most.
Yeah.
I don't know if you like I don't know why they never tried to port it to console. I mean, like since then they've put it on like Xbox Arcade or whatever, but like like you know, like TMNT 2 was a really big beat 'em up, similar time, 4-player, and they ported that to the NES. It would have been interesting to see them try and like, you know, consoleize that game and put it on the SNES or the NES, but I don't know why they didn't. But they came up with some other video games. They didn't not want to make Simpsons video games, I'll tell you that. They were set to do that. They just didn't want to port the one they made.
They were not discouraged by making bad games. They just thought, you know, quantity over quality.
It's just strange. They had one really good game that they could have just tried to port to systems, but they said, no, we're going to make a bunch of new games instead. So do you have any favorite Simpsons characters, episodes, anything?
So I had to look up the name of the episode when I saw you put this in the notes, but my favorite episode was always Das Bus, which is the Lord of the Flies episode.
Okay.
The one where the bus drives off of a bridge and all of the kids find themselves stranded on an island, and that's basically a satire of Lord of the Flies. Like they find all these snacks in the bus, and they think Milhouse ate them all, and he says that it was actually a monster that ate them, and like by the end of it, they actually find the monster.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't completely remember that one. That sounds amazing. I do remember like the first TV show cliffhanger I remember, where it was like a season finale and they made you wait for the next year, was when Who Shot Mr. Burns? And it was like a big deal. It was like who shot? It ended up being Maggie, but like they were like, yeah, everybody like was a suspect, and it was just like, I don't know. It was really the first time I remember wanting to know something and having to wait months. Yeah,
I forgot about that cliffhanger. I forgot they definitely pulled a Dallas on that one.
Yeah, and I had to wait months to figure it out. So like for me, that was like the first time I was like, oh. I remember the Michael Jackson episode being good just because like the Happy Birthday Lisa song's really good, and then I love horror stuff, so I always like the Treehouse of Horrors and stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Anything to deal with the aliens. Favorite characters? I don't know. I don't really. I'm trying to I like Troy McClure.
Sure.
Sometimes like I think of like referencing that, and I'm like, I don't even know if people know that, but it's like, I'm Troy McClure. You may know me from, and then he's always I also like the episode Mr. Plow. That's a classic one.
Sure. Yeah, I always really liked Chief Wiggum.
Chief
I
Wiggum.
like Principal Skinner.
Oh,
Um,
who's the kid in the kid who always says really dumb things? Not the
Ralph Wiggum.
brightest. Yeah,
It's
he's my
his
favorite.
son.
He's my favorite, probably actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of really strong characters. I think The Simpsons did a great job of having a great cross section of characters that each are so unique and lively. You know, it's so easy to have characters that just sort of blend in to fill out space, but each one of them is sort of a solid character on its own.
Absolutely. So diving into, I guess, the game series, unfortunately, I don't think they really ever captured this awesome show universe in a video game until at least much later on. I mean, even the good Simpsons games though are like Simpsons Hit and Run. Like they never made like
Oh
a
yeah, that game's really solid.
but they never made like a
Simpsons Hit
South
and Run.
Park Stick of Truth game. Did they ever make anything that's like you can go around and meet all the characters and stuff like that? Because it feels like they
I mean,
feels like
Simpsons
a
Hit and Run is though. I mean, it's a Grand Theft Auto game.
yeah,
So
okay.
you go around the whole town and you interact with characters, and there's like storylines and missions.
And that wasn't until like the GameCube era, basically.
Yeah,
So
that was
like,
GameCube.
so they were trying to make, Simpsons games from 8-bit era on, and they didn't really do anything good until then.
Yeah,
But
there were a lot of Simpsons
I mean, a
games. There
lot.
were 3 on the NES, 4 on the Game Boy, and each of those games had their own ports to basically, Amiga, ZX Spectrum, um, tons of consoles. So, like,
Yeah.
they had no shortage of games going around, just none worth talking about, really.
Yeah, it seems like if they had just taken the time to, I guess, commission the right company to do it and just make one game in like a 3-year period instead of like 8 games in a 3-year period, maybe they
So I
could have
guess
made one good one.
So I guess talking about that, let's jump right into our
Absolutely.
first game we're talking about. So our first game we're talking about is Bart versus the World, which was on the NES, which was developed by Imagineering and published by Acclaim in North America in February of 1991. So Imagineering may not be a company that you're familiar with, but they actually were responsible for the vast majority of the 8-bit and 16-bit Simpsons games. They were responsible for most of them, except for the ports. The ports were made by other companies. So Imagineering, you might be familiar with them for titles such as Akari Warriors, but not the good Akari Warriors, only the Atari versions, and Ghostbuster 2 on the NES, which, though slightly better than Ghostbusters on the NES, it's not to be confused with the actually good HAL Laboratories
PAL
new
one, yeah.
Ghostbusters 2. So
They were also
you know,
responsible for Chernobyl, I believe, right?
that and many other horrible war crimes.
Yeah, they seem to have done a lot of really good things for the world.
So this was the second video game based on the animated show after Bart versus the Space Mutants. So
Oh,
you
that
may
was
be
the
familiar
first
with.
one. Okay.
Yeah, Bart versus the Space Mutants was the first one. This was the second one to come out. And the plot of it centers on the Krusty Clown show. Bart wins the opportunity to participate in an around-the-world scavenger hunt. But in reality, the contest was rigged by Mr. Burns' assistant, Smithers, to rid himself of the Simpsons family for all the trouble they caused him. So Burns sends his agents to take care of the Simpsons during the scavenger hunt, and Bart actually travels to lots of real-world locations. You can see them on the cover art of the game. So he travels to China, the North Pole, Egypt, and Hollywood, and ultimately he's trying to track down the members of the Burns family. So at the end of each world, you fight Fu Manchu Burns in China, you fight the abominable Snow Burns in the North Pole, Ramses Burns in Egypt, and Eric von Burns in Hollywood.
They
And
couldn't
so
get
once
any
you-
good Egyptian one, huh?
Yeah, they
Ramses
they
Burns
script-
is okay, but I mean Fu
Yeah,
Manchu
basically-
Burns and Abominable
that one's a
Snowman
pretty good
Burns.
one.
I like those.
No, Abominable Snow Burns, which
Yeah, I
is
like
a
that. I
fantastic
like
name
that.
on its own.
Yeah.
That's a really solid one. So this game was ultimately released for the Amiga, the Atari ST, Game Gear, NES, Sega Master System, and it was
Wow, Master
actually,
System. Not in the
Yeah,
U.S.,
it
I
was-
don't think. It must have been somewhere else.
Probably not. It was ported by a variety of developers and publishers. So
That's crazy.
Arc Development and Virgin Interactive worked on this one, and the other game, Bart versus Space Mutants, was like Arc Development Ocean, and High Flying, I think was the name of the other. So like these games, hit like every company trying to do their best, and none of them actually achieving.
Well, because it's funny. I mean, The Simpsons were so popular at the time.
Right.
Like
It
having
seems
that
like the material
license
should
would
have
be.
been great.
I mean, having that license is like a big deal. That's like having the Mickey Mouse license, or like whatever hot show is going on at the time. You think you'd want. TMNT was really big at the same time, like in the
I think the
'90s, and the
thing
games
is,
were so good. But in this. And all these games were made the same year, too. That's the crazy thing. This was made the same year as Escape from Camp Deadly. Also, Space Mutants was made the same year. So, like, 3 of these games came out the same year. It's just like, what were they doing?
they were just spitting them out. I think the thing is, though, that this game's theme maybe doesn't lend itself to really shallow games, like just casual platformers and things like that. Because where this game really ended up shining was, in my opinion, is games like Simpsons Hit and Run, where you actually were able to interact with the entirety of the Simpsons universe. And I think that's really where the license really played itself up the best. And so maybe the issue wasn't just that this is a stellar license and they were all idiots, but in reality, maybe this was just a hard license to use in that 8-bit era.
I mean, they could have made them good at least, but I mean that's a different, like, they clearly didn't program good video games. But yeah, like if you imagine, like, how would you make a South Park game on the NES like right now? Like, it wouldn't really translate to like just a platformer. So yeah, I mean, I agree, it's not really indicative of that. And reviews for this were largely mixed. Most complaints centered around the sluggish controls that plagued Bart versus the Space Mutants, with most of the gameplay being dumbed down to being vanilla and boring platforming. And then also several minigames in each area, including matching card games and trivia games, were based on the first 2 seasons of the show. Kind of.
Yeah. So if you know trivia from the first 2 seasons, you are in there for this game.
Yeah.
But outside of that. It's actually funny, though. I mean, in 1991, this was really early with the Simpsons license.
Exactly. Yeah, I was thinking
like
the same
1989
thing.
was when this show debuted. So releasing a game in February 1991, that's actually only 1 full year of the show even being available. So
yeah,
they really probably didn't have a good idea of what the Simpsons were going to be eventually. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't fully fleshed out. And so it seems like maybe that was also a hindrance for them.
Yeah, The Simpsons, I believe, started as a cartoon for some night, like Tonight Show or something of the sort, and then evolved into its own thing. And was really like kind of hit its zenith in like the mid to late 90s. So we're like you said, like season 2, whatever. I actually grew up with this game, funny enough, and played it a lot, and I liked it. I never got anywhere in it. Watching the speedrun, I realized that I probably touched about 1/5, 1/6 of the game. But I loved playing the trivia game. Like, I used to love playing the matching card game and the trivia game, like, all the time. So I guess that's good for somebody. You would look at that now and be like, oh, that's just fluff. That's dumb that you put that in there. But as a kid, I liked it. So,
I mean, I could totally understand the complaints that reviewers had for this game, though. I mean, even if you just watch the game, even if you don't play it yourself, I'm sure it's 10 times worse if you play it yourself. But even if you just watch the game, a lot of the stages are just so uninspired. There's like going through an ice cave, and it's literally just jumping back and forth between 2 columns of platforms to make it to the top. Like, there's just nothing exciting there.
Chat said it's the Tracy Ullman show is what it was on. That's right. And then it developed into the full show. So, do we want to do the reviews of this game, or do we want to do them together? What do you want to do, my friend?
Yeah, let's split it up by doing it now.
Okay, so we'll just go through our general ratings that we normally go through. We talk about graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, fun and replayability. We make any miscellaneous comments that we might not be covered by those topics, and then give it an overall rating from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, actually, because I think our lowest score has been a 0.5, and our highest has been a 10, so I'll clearly give this a 10. I mean, how could I not?
For sure.
So, graphics, what do you think?
I mean, it's for the 8-bit era, even for the 8-bit era, it's pretty uninspired.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the backgrounds are just flat colors or patterned walls or something like that. Really, it lacks a lot of the elements that make the Simpsons visually interesting. So I think that they even missed the mark there. And frankly, that comment could go for both games, because both Bart versus the Space Mutants and Bart versus the World both basically had the exact same graphics
Yeah.
in both of them. So
I would say
I mean,
Escape from Camp Deadly actually had better graphics, which is kind of sad when you consider it's a Game Boy game. But the graphics in this, I think, are one of the biggest failures. Like, you can make a bad game about a license, like, and like what people want to do is they want to see like the characters that they connect with and control them. I mean, like when you're talking about a license specifically, like, I mean, that's like the biggest thing, even above gameplay, is like people want to see the characters they see on TV and hit right and the character moves right. And like Bart just doesn't even look good. He looks so amateurish. I think part of that also could equate to, like, if you go back and watch like season 1 of The Simpsons, like the art style is way worse than it was like a year or two
yeah, it was
later.
much rougher.
Like, it was
But I mean,
really rough.
that being said, though, I mean, it still even missed the mark for season 1. So
I'd agree, and like you said, most of the level design and enemy design is just pretty uninspired for the most part. Some of the bosses are fine. Like, I think some
yeah,
of the boss sprites are pretty cool. The
I
abominable
think
smoke burns looks good.
yeah, I like Ramsey's Burns,
Yeah,
and Eric Von Burns is on the crane director's chair, and it actually
yeah.
kind of looks like a cool boss fight. But
Like when you're skateboarding on the Great Wall of China, like the big dragons look pretty good. So like there's parts that look okay, but then there's lots of parts that just look really amateurish, and I think that kind of really takes away from it. Music and sound, the music is just literally the Simpsons theme song, but like done in different ways, like under different styles. Like it'll be the Simpsons theme song with like a Chinese themed song overlapping with it. Like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it's
yeah,
not good.
some of the later worlds deviate a little more from that.
But it
I
always
mean,
has the music in there somewhere.
yeah, they're probably still variants, but they differ enough in some of the later worlds, at least that I've seen, that it doesn't get too frustrating. But in general, the music's no better than the graphics. It's just
But it's just like
uninspired versions of the Simpsons theme song, and then even if the other songs were their own unique music, they're not very interesting to begin with.
they just like had to put the Simpsons theme song in every single song.
And
I
you know
liked
the
I
thing
liked
is,
the horror level. The horror level, it fits really well, and I think they did a good job of it. Or the one with the trees and all like that stuff.
sure, yeah,
But
Hollywood.
but the other ones, for the most part, I will say this: I love the sound effects of this game. I love it. I loved them as a kid. That whatever. I don't even know how to explain the noise. Like the noise you take whenever you get hit and when you pick something correct in the mini games and stuff like that. I love that sound for some reason. So I'm all in
Is
on
it
that sound.
is it maybe supposed to be so for the other games in this series? Whenever Bart gets hit,
Yeah.
the game freezes and he says, "Eat my shorts."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering whether or not that's what they were going for, but ultimately failed at, because I've definitely seen some 8-bit games do really rudimentary voice samples. I wouldn't say they're good at all, but
I mean,
I've
if
seen
they
them
got
do
it to work on the Game Boy, I think if they were trying for that, they could have gotten it to work on the NES. I mean, same company too. So I
Sure.
don't think that's probably what they were going for. I don't know what they were going for, but the chicken chicken, that sound, I don't know. I
Right.
love it. I love it. I love it. Can't get enough of it. Controls and gameplay, very very slippery, like
Yeah,
skatey, floaty.
this
You
game
jump really
was
high.
it was criticized when it first came out, and they were right on the money when they first criticized it, and it holds true even today. This game's controls can best be described as sluggish. Everything moves sort of like you're on ice, but not really ice, more like a floor covered in jelly. Uh, it's just kind of hard to explain. Bart feels very heavy, while at the same time feeling like he has no traction, which is a really strange combination.
Yeah, I could see that. I would say, gameplay wise, we were initially going to talk about Bart versus the Space Mutants until we realized neither of us had any clue what was going on in that game. But that game at least has some semblance of like trying to do things, solve things, find people, whatever. This game is, and there's combat in it, and like, I don't know, you get items and you use the items on things, or you try and jump on an enemy to see if they're an alien. This game literally is just platforming, and like very, very uninspired platforming.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
like someone took Bart versus the Space Mutants and said, I liked all the parts where you jumped on things, wasn't a big fan of the rest of it.
yeah, and so like even where Bart versus the Space Mutants fails, like it's definitely a way better game than this. This is just really, I think uninspired is honestly just the best word for this game.
It's gonna be the word of the
Yeah,
episode.
because it's just like, I don't like. There's this section in the ice level where you're literally just jumping up platforms for like minutes, and it's just like they're just rows of platforms. It's not like especially difficult, but they're just like there, and like I mean, yeah, it's slippery, but I don't know. There's no enemies attacking you. There's no like items to grab. You're just going back and forth. It's dumb. So difficulty
For
and
sure.
fairness. This game was hard for me as a kid. I assume it would still be a bit hard because of the controls, but um,
Yeah, the controls definitely aren't doing you any favors. That being said, I, I haven't beaten the game. I don't know whether or not I would say that it's necessarily hard. A lot of the stuff that I haven't played before at least looks relatively straightforward, and at its heart, it's just a really poorly executed platformer. So
yeah.
of course, I'm biased because platformers are what I play so much, so it's not difficult for me more often than not. But that being said, I have a hard time imagining this game actually holds up as a difficult game these days.
Yeah, fun and replayability. I would say there's probably not a lot of replayability. That's pretty expected for an 8-bit platformer, though. Fun. I mean, I don't know. I can say that I had this game as a kid. I was the target audience for this game when it came out, and I did like it. I specifically liked the trivia games and stuff. So, I mean, I had fun with it. I didn't think of it as a bad game when I played it as a kid. So it had to
Sure.
have been a bit fun. But again,
Yeah.
like, I had no standards then, so it's fine. I mean, you had a game, you put it in, you just hit buttons. I mean, that's what happens when you're a kid in the 90s and you have an NES game.
I'm thinking of
Um,
a few specific segments in this game, like we've mentioned a few times the ice platforming, but
the,
then
the
also,
skateboarding's fun. Honestly, the
uh,
skateboarding was fun when I was a kid on the
yeah,
Great Wall of China.
yeah,
I
for
enjoyed
sure,
it. I enjoyed it.
for sure. But then there's also the segment like in the Hollywood stage where you're just jumping back and forth across rows of like crypts, like
Yeah.
these plaques in a crypt, and it once you go back and forth one time, you realize the game is just going to put you through that like a dozen more times.
Yeah.
And it's moments like that where you realize they really didn't have a lot of content. They didn't know what they were doing, so they just stretched it out. And
Yeah.
that can usually take something that could ultimately end up being boring and make it really unfun.
Yeah. Miscellaneous thoughts. I just think they could have obviously done a much better job with the license. Watching, like a speedrun of Bart versus Space Mutants, at least it feels a bit more like you're in the town of Springfield. Like there's the statue of Jedediah Springfield that you have to like hit with some stuff. Like the Space Mutants are in Simpsons episodes, like those.
Hmm.
So like it just feels like it actually like
Yeah, it's a world
belongs
that
in that
makes sense.
universe. And then like this doesn't feel like it belongs in the universe at all. Like other than seeing the Krusty heads, like every place you're at is not a place that you see a Simpsons episode at. And the game makes no sense. I don't know. This game
It feels like a game that they might have had a different idea in mind and they just slapped the Simpsons license on, because the whole idea of
Yeah.
going to China and fighting a boss you've never heard of before, and then going to the North Pole and fighting a boss you've never heard on,
and then Egypt
heard of,
and like
yeah, and so on and so on. It feels a lot like a game that they said, well, we've got this game already, and they want another Simpsons game.
I could definitely see that. So 0 to 10. Who's going first? Do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
I mean, if all you care about is it being a platformer, it's at least a competent platformer, albeit probably about as boring as a platformer can be. I'd probably give this a 3.
Yeah, that's fair. I was gonna go 2.5. I'm gonna agree with you and go 3 because I really liked the trivia as a kid. So I'm gonna go with a 3. But I mean, I honestly feel like that might even be pushing it.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, really
that's.
pushing it. I think it's probably more of a 2.5.
I feel like I'm being really generous because I like platformers. I feel like if platformers are not your bread and butter, this game is gonna have a hard time breaking 0.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll go 2.5. I'm changing it to 2.5. It's bad.
wow.
I liked it as a kid, but it's even looking at Bart versus Space Mutants, I'm like, I probably would have enjoyed that more as a kid. Just like, it's just there's more to it. So
Yeah, I don't blame it.
So, anyways, we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break, and then we're gonna talk about another Simpsons game.
Yeah, I rearranged it so there would actually be a music break. Otherwise, this was going to be the longest segment ever.
Ever. Okay, I can kick this one off if you want.
Go
Or
for
do
it.
you want to?
You're welcome to kick it off, and I'll just take over after the plot.
Okay. Um. Sorry. So moving on, we're the. See, this is the thing. These are the things we do in between segments.
Take two.
Moving on from Bart vs. the World, we're going to be talking about Bart Simpson's escape from Camp Deadly for the Game Boy. As you all know, I love Game Boy games, so I'm excited to talk about this game. It was developed by Imagineering and published by Acclaim, similar to Bart vs. the World, in November of 91, same year. It was actually released in Japan 2 years later in 1993 under the title Bart No Survival Camp. And the first Simpsons game to be released on a portable console. And basically the plot of this game is similar to an episode called Camp Krusty, although the episode didn't air until 1992, interestingly enough. So it was a spoiler. It was a spoiler for that episode.
Yeah, a lot of the information I was looking up actually wasn't clear on whether or not one of them inspired the other. There's no real reason to believe that either had to inspire the other, because the idea of just Bart and Lisa going to a summer camp's not all that unique.
Sure.
But what I found mostly talked about the game being inspired by the episode, which makes it sound like the episode was actually written way in advance in order to be able to produce a game about it a year earlier.
Interesting. So Bart and Lisa go to an evil summer camp run by Mr. Burns' nephew, Ironside Burns. I like that name. Sounds like somebody who fought in World War II. I don't understand why that is his name. So the campers are made to have as little fun as possible. And so the game takes place in one day. The counselors harassing the campers. So the counselors are the main enemies that you're fighting. There's a lot of them and not a lot of campers, so I don't really understand what's going on. During camp activities, it's divided into meal breaks where the counselors are throwing utensils. And after dinner, Bart and Lisa escape the camp and enter a stage where they climb Mount Deadly to get out of the camp. Finally, Lisa is kidnapped, and Bart has to save her from the clutches of Ironside Burns, who has her at the power plant. And ultimately, when you beat the game, spoilers, you flip the switch to turn off the electricity of the camp, and then that fixed everything. Apparently, camp's over. They can't flip the switch back up just to turn the power back on. I don't really understand that.
All you gotta do is turn it off.
Yeah, I find that suspicious. So, yeah, and this is primarily an action platformer, just like Bart vs. the World or the Space Mutants. And with enemies bombarding you as you attempt to make your way through the levels, navigating obstacles. You can shoot spitwads, you can find boomerangs from Lisa and use those, and in the meal stages you can also throw like the cafeteria food that you pick up. There are no power-ups similar to, we forgot to mention, but in Bart vs. the World you can get a Bartman power-up. That is one thing that's cool in that game, which lets you fly. There's no, similar power-ups or anything in this. And playing through it, this is a pretty difficult game. Have you beaten it? I know you've played it, but have you gone all the way through?
I've played quite a lot of it, but I never beat it. I think I made it to like the 5th level or like before dinner time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I never ended up finishing the game off.
It's got some pretty tough points, especially near the end of the game. Climbing up the ladders and inside the mountain, and then climbing on the outside of the mountain is really tough because you can get like knocked down and die. There's these bee swarms that come at you at the end that are just like impossible to hit and really difficult. So it's definitely not super easy. And I found it interesting. It was actually released to mixed reviews. I was surprised it got a bunch of like fairly positive reviews too. Like, I think Nintendo Power gave it like a 3.4 out of 5 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and then some places were like, this is complete garbage. So I don't know why there was a disconnect for. I would think you'd review this and be like, this is your general licensed affair, but apparently some people liked it and some people really hated it. So
yeah, it was kind of surprising. So the game got like directly compared to Bart versus Space Mutants and Bart versus the World. Critics seem to really not like the game in general. They found it boring and underwhelming, despite the fact that most of the critics acknowledged that the gameplay was improved from the previous Simpsons games. So albeit simplified, this game has far less of the aspects of combat from Bart versus the Space Mutant. So I guess that makes it more on par with Bart versus the World, since Bart versus the World's pretty simplified too.
Sure. So let's just dive into our ratings because it's probably the easiest way to discuss this game more at length.
Yeah.
Like the graphics, I think they look pretty good for the Game Boy. If I'm being honest, there are multiple different environments that you switch between. There's the general forest levels, there's the cafeteria levels, then there's climbing the mountain. It just feels a little more cohesive and better than something like Bart vs. the World. I think the Bart sprite looks a lot better than Bart vs. the World personally. Like the Nelson sprite looks like Nelson. The Lisa sprite looks like Lisa. Like it's just better. I think it's just sharper. Like it just reminds me of the cartoon more. So I think they're good.
This game tries to split the difference between the issue that a lot of licensed games have. So you actually mentioned a really good point that plays into this one really well earlier with Bart versus the World, and you said that when you have a licensed game, what people really care about is being able to recognize the character. Like you're not playing Bart versus the World for its, stellar contributions to the platforming genre. You're playing it because you like The Simpsons more likely than not.
Yeah.
And so you really want to recognize the character. And I think that that's an issue that a lot of licensed games really get into is balancing not having your character be too large for the game to not be playable and not having your character too small that you can't recognize the license anymore.
Sure.
And I think this game tries its hardest to balance that fine line, but I think it ultimately fails in the direction that most licensed games fail, which is the sprite's just too big.
I think it's more. That's probably more a failure of being a Game Boy game, honestly, than being a licensed game.
That's something. Yeah, we've talked about that for Game Boy in general. Like, in order to keep the fidelity of the image you're going for, you really have to make it pretty large. And it certainly doesn't help that it's a licensed game, so you got to recognize Bart.
For every Super Mario Land 1, which has a pretty small Mario for a pretty big level, you have 10 games where Mega Man or Bart or whoever is probably like 50% too large for the level.
Yeah, I think if you knocked about 25% off of Bart's size, it would be perfect as far as gameplay aspect goes.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's terrible. I think this game actually did get some criticism for that about just the characters being too large for the screen. But in general, I think I've seen way worse games.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
This is kind of on par with Super Mario Land 2, I think. Mario's fairly large, but it's not a problem. He's just large.
Yeah, he's a bit taller than Mario 2, though, I think. I think it is a bit too big. But you jump very high, so I think that kind of counteracts the like for example, I've speedrun Mega Man 2 on Game Boy, and Mega Man's a bit too big, but then when you get in a boss fight with an equally big boss, it's really hard to jump over them, and this game fixes that by just letting Bart jump higher than he probably should. So,
for sure.
Music and sound, music's fairly uninspired. I do like the Simpsons theme in it. To be honest, it's pretty good. The Eat My Shorts when you get hit is really obnoxious, but it's also pretty impressive in terms of being a sample,
a voice sample on the Game Boy is really something.
In 1991 that you can clearly hear. I think that's pretty impressive. So I would give them some points for that.
Yeah, whether it sounds good or not, you just have to admire the technical prowess of being able to pull that off.
Yeah, it's weird when strange games have really good voice samples. For example, I think it's GameSack that sometimes they'll do these reviews of stuff that pushes the limits of the hardware they're on, and the
Sure.
NES example for voice samples is the game with the count for Sesame Street.
Yeah,
Countdown, because it has
Sesame Street 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, because it has a really good voice sample in it of.
Yeah, I can see that.
But at the same time, it's obviously not a game that pushes the limits in terms of gameplay or graphics. But so this is
amazing, when you think about some of those older games, the Game Boy and NES games, where they really shouldn't have had the ability to do so. But you have games like that and games like Escape from Camp Deadly, where the voice samples are so good, and then you look at the SNES and realize they had no excuse for not having good voice samples. I mean,
Sure.
one of the sound channels on the Super Nintendo was specifically for samples, if I'm not mistaken. How do you mess this up?
But the Game Boy is not known for its voice samples, I will say that. And so I thought
right.
But it's really obnoxious that every time you get hit, you have to hear Eat My Shorts. It stops being impressive very quickly and makes you hate it. So Controls and gameplay. This game definitely controls better than the NES Simpsons games, I think. I mean, it's
Right.
still like floaty and skatey, I think, but it's definitely a bit tighter in terms of the platforming, and so
Yeah,
I
it's not
thought it's a
exactly
step
where
up.
you'd want it to be. It's not exactly where you want it to be, but at the very least, if you want to, turn this way or that to face an enemy, you can usually do it. I mean, the game will let you do what you put your mind to.
Yeah, and a
So,
lot of games on the Game Boy, I think we think of having better physics than they did. Like SML2 and SML1 are like not Mario physics. They're strange physics in
no.
themselves. So, this kind of fits that bag of like not being quite what you'd expect from platforming physics, but I think it controls well. I think the gameplay is interesting enough in terms of like switching between the forest and the cafeteria levels. Like, those are like the main ones, but then like ending the game with all this climbing and kind of traveling through the cave system. I don't know.
Right.
I enjoyed it. So it's a very frustrating game. I will say that. I guess coming up next, difficulty and fairness. It is a very hard game. I think like it frustrated me to try and beat. It's definitely a game like that would be more fun to pick up for 20 minutes, play it, and then be like, whatever, and then maybe eventually, gradually get good enough at it or understand it to beat it. But saying I'm gonna beat this game in one sitting, I mean, it took me a little under 2 hours, but it was a really
Yeah, I was about to say
frustrating 2 hours.
I have kind of a hard time calling a game difficult if it's beatable in 2 hours, but at the same time, I think this is one of those games that is one but not the other. So in my opinion, I would say that it's not difficult, but it's very unfair, which artificially raises the difficulty.
Yeah, it took me an hour and 43 minutes, but it was a long hour and 43 minutes. Cuz I don't think you have a pretty limited number of lives, and so you have to start the whole game over again if you die, I believe. And so that kind of just adds up
For
to
sure.
having to restart and play the same things over and over. But that's kind of how the Game Boy worked because they didn't have enough space to give you this sprawling adventure generally. So,
Yeah, not a lot
um,
of games let you continue your game.
fun and replayability. I mean, same as
No.
any other platform on the Game Boy, it'd be replayable to try and get it to beat it, but I haven't
Well, I
been
mean, in general, even then, comparing it to other platformers, it's really not the same because in this game, the first level and the third level and the fifth level are basically the same thing, and the
sure
second level
with
and the fourth
increased
level and
difficulty. Yeah,
right. I mean,
sure,
you go back and forth from being outside and climbing up trees and avoiding counselors to being
sure.
inside and throwing food and avoiding
I mean,
counselors,
I guess
and you
that's
just
one
repeat that
thing
cycle.
you could say is it lacked the variety at least that Bart vs. the World did. There are parts in Bart vs. the World where you're skateboarding, and then there's parts where you can at least do like the mini games. There's not as much, I guess, variety of gameplay other than the climbing and stuff. But yeah, I could understand that.
Yeah.
Miscellaneous thoughts?
I don't know how, but somehow this game is both better and worse than Bart vs. the World.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it feels like it more correctly achieved what a Simpsons game should go for and was more playable, and somehow at the same time still is somehow less good to play.
Okay. So what are you gonna give it? I've got mine written down because I'm gonna read my Game Boy Quest review real quick. So I'm not
Okay.
gonna change mine based on what you say. I'm just curious.
Okay. That's
I don't
fine.
want to affect your pick.
So I have an implicit bias because my interactions with this have mostly been speedrunning,
Mm-hmm.
and I do think that it has some interesting elements that make it a slightly better speedrun than it is a casual game. And so I feel like my rating's going to be too high, but I'm going to give it anyway. I'm going to say a 5.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
wow, that is very high.
yeah,
Because I thought I was way too high. I gave this a 4 for Game Boy Quest, and that's in comparison to other Game Boy games, not like all games ever. And I said this game is terrible. Why does it get a 4? I don't know. I kind of like it. I don't know why. It's bad. Okay, it has to be a 4. It's a 4, but there's something charming about this game. I love the 8-bit Simpsons songs. The controls are not great but passable. The levels are kind of cool since they're out of camp. I can't really explain it, and I've never wanted to smoke more than when I was trying to beat this game, but I give it a 4 due to it being so bad it's charming. So,
okay.
that's what I said when I played it. There's just something about this game that I like, and I don't know how to quantify it. Like I just don't get it. But
Yeah,
it's definitely
I'm
more
cool.
likable than Bart vs. the World.
I'm cool with a 4, but I felt uncomfortable giving it a score so close to my 3 I gave Bart vs. the World.
You wanted to
Um,
distance yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I felt like I needed some buffer room. Maybe that meant Bart versus the World needed to be lower. But
Sure. Okay.
That's where my 5 came from.
Well, that is our review of Escape from Camp Deadly. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to run through both of these speed runs. If you guys want to start preparing any Q&A you have for our Q&A section, we're going to probably knock out both these speedrun sections in one section and then do Q&A after a quick break.
Yeah, so throw it at us, and while we're talking, I will tuck it into our notes. I already have one from Kamikaze Cracker. I copied it as we went. So if you have more questions you'd like to throw at us, I'm happy to add them in. But with that, I'm going to get us started on the speedrun discussion.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to talk about both of these games as speedruns back to back. They, in general, don't have quite as much depth as the sort of games that we typically talk about, but in general, for our Bad Games episode, that's why we combine multiple games together. So starting off with Bart versus the world record is currently 9 minutes and 50 seconds by Vorpal. And this is kind of an interesting little speed game if you watch it through. So the platforming itself maybe isn't all that fascinating. A lot of it's just trying to quickly make your way through the stages. But one of the neat things about this game is that there's the Bartman pickups that give Bart the ability to fly. And some of them look like they would be pretty hard to find casually, like you wouldn't just come across them naturally. Mm-hmm. And so going out of your way to pick those up, to use them as mild sequence breaks, I think is pretty cool. So for instance, in the Chinese, in the China stage, the first stage you're like the first part of it, you're on a boat, and he jumps off of the mast toward the beginning to grab one out of the air and then uses that to fly up to the exit at the end of the stage. And there's a few instances of stuff like that, Bartman pickups that you wouldn't probably find naturally, but do make it seemingly a lot easier to skip big portions of the stage, which frankly for how lackluster the platforming is probably pretty crucial.
Yeah, there's a specific one, I think it's the Egypt stage, I'm not sure, where you just like jump off the whole left side of the pyramid, like out into like looking like you're seemingly going to jump back to the beginning of the level after doing some climbing, and you hit a Bartman pickup and you're able to fly over a big section of it, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And this is going to be true of both games, and I'll just mention it again when we get to the other game. But one aspect of speedrunning this game is that every time Bart gets hit, the game stuns for a moment. The entire game freezes to play a little sound effect. And so this game really doesn't have a lot of opportunity for damage boosting. You just wouldn't be able to use that to speed your way through hazards, for instance, because the amount of time it would take you to slow down for those hazards is offset by just naturally waiting for them,
Yeah.
Instead of powering your way through them, you're going to lose just as much time as if you just waited.
We spoke about a similar thing with Barbie Game Girl when we did that way back in, I think, our second Bad Games episode. But that does a similar thing where when you get hit, I think it's also made by Imagineering, if I'm not correct, you can tell me, but similar, where you get, every time you get hit, it does a sound effect or plays something.
Which game?
Barbie Game Girl, which affects the way you route a game like that, because damage boosting is such a like default part of routing platformers, being able to use iframes and different stuff, and it's just not something you can do in this game or in Barbie Game Girl, which is kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of very little movement tech that you can see here and there. So, for instance, in some of the ice stage platforming, he jumps off of the side of the stage into what looks like just the scenery, but he can use those parts from time to time to help him do the platforming more quickly. There's also in the North Pole level, there's these ice blocks that are in the water, and when you jump on them, they start to move, and you can ride them across the water. But what I assume the reason is that they made it so that every time you land on the ice block, it speeds up a little bit so that it can get going the first time you land on it. But in the speed run, he just jumps on it over and over, so it keeps its high speed rather than letting it slow back down. So that's pretty neat tech, and some of those ice blocks are pretty small, so I don't know if it's as dangerous as it looks, but there's definitely some parts where he's jumping up and down on ice blocks that it looks like it's not going to work out well for him, but it does.
Yeah, it looks scary, at least watching it. I don't know if it like automatically keeps you on it no matter what, or if you can jump off the side. I wasn't good enough at this game as a kid to get to that point, which is like 2 minutes into the speed run, so that's kind of sad. There's also door maze section, which is obviously going to be way quicker when you've routed it out versus playing casually.
Yeah, we love door
I
mazes.
hate door
You
mazes.
can tell from us talking about Barbie Game Girl with such fond memories. Door mazes are the best part of any speedrun. Best way to take a segment and artificially increase its length is to make it so that you have no idea which way is the right way. And this game does that, so just memorizing which route to go is obviously going to be a huge asset versus a casual playthrough.
Yeah, Monster Party was the first game I ran at a GDQ in one of my first speedruns, and that has anytime I've watched somebody casually play that, since it's a pretty, not very well known game, I guess. The door maze room, which takes 45 seconds in the speedrun, like is probably like an hour and a half, just because it's a really bad door maze, and it's just like, ugh, I hate when they do that. But
Yeah, there's a lot of games with really obnoxious door mazes. Adventures of Rad Gravity is another one that has a really obnoxious door maze. Little Mermaid on the NES has a really obnoxious door maze.
It's really annoying in that one if you just go through the same door 3 times in a row, you get to the right point. It's like all that time you spend as a kid wandering around, like ugh. So
you could even technically say Bubsy 1 has door mazes, even though it's not really mazes. It's just the doors always screw you.
Sure. So moving on to Escape from Camp Deadly. This game was initially routed by my boy Spiderweb, but the world record is a 1631 by Coughing Rocks. He does a lot of Game Boy speedruns. Go check him out. So the things you want to know about this run, every time you get hit again, Bart is stunned and says, "Eat my shorts," so there's no damage boosting or anything. The big thing is the camera scrolls at a fixed rate that is slightly slower than Bart's speed in the air, but the same as his running speed. So basically what you try and do is position yourself closely to the right edge of the screen, and that can give you an advantage with some enemy patterns. Especially like enemies that will follow you, you want to get them to your left so they keep following you, so that no more of them spawn to the right of you, and so that way you can just keep holding right and get to the end of the area. If you're playing this casually, like, you're going to keep running into the counselors and fighting them, but if you can get 2 counselors to your left, that hits the sprite limit and you can just keep running to the right, which is pretty good. Also, the key weapon you want is the boomerang. You want to get the boomerangs that throughout the game, and those the cool thing about the boomerang is it does, if you use it and it comes back and hits your sprite, you keep it, so you don't actually run out of them, and so you can constantly use those to be hitting the enemies that are in your way. If not, your attack is, I don't even know if you can attack if you don't have boomerangs. I think there's other items
You've
can
got
maybe
spit
use.
wads as well,
Spit wads.
which I don't know if they do as much damage, but that's like your default weapon when you don't have anything else.
Yeah, the other thing about a boomerang is, like, you can jump and throw it and then let it slash down to hit something. Like there's a lot more opportunity to hit things in different ways with it, both casually and on the speed run. You'll see, like in the Nelson fight, throwing it through him and then letting it come back and hit him again, so you can get 2 hits in one go. So the boomerang is faster in a lot of different situations. There's also a decent bit of RNG in this game, which I guess we don't know if there is any in Bart vs. World. It didn't seem like it, but maybe some boss RNG. This one, there's several levels with basically conveyor belts that are carrying like lunch, dinner, silverware, plates and stuff, and the enemies spawning randomly and shooting things at you randomly, where you have to stop and duck, can cost you a lot of time depending on what patterns you get. And then also the number of, I guess, burgers, pizza, ice cream items you get, because you have to get a certain number to move on. Is that right? Or I'm trying to remember.
I don't think it's that. They're used as weapons, but when you get to the end of a segment in the meal section, it forces you to throw them away, just so that you can't carry them into the next section. And so obviously, as you're running through that area, you're going to naturally pick up a lot of them. So it's important to balance out keeping enough to be able to deal with enemies, while at the same time not holding on to so many that you have to wait a really long time to ditch them all in the trash can.
Yeah, it's a typical like score countdown or whatever, basically, where you have 6 burgers left and it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can move on. So you're going to lose a couple seconds. And yeah, I mean, that's about it, honestly, other than the fact that, there's some difficult sections, specifically like ladders and the mountain parts that you're traversing near the end of the game. The bats can be really annoying on the ladders, and again, you lose a decent bit of time every time you're hit because of the sound effect. But even more than that, you have pretty limited health in this game. You pick up, I think you start with 3 circles of health. I don't know what the circles are supposed to represent. Donuts,
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, that's not really very many. You can get your bar filled up 7, 8, whatever. And you're gonna want that because I think dying is really punishing and just gonna be a reset. So, but yeah, other than that, it's a pretty typical Game Boy platformer. I think it's very difficult speedrun, I would say. Very frustrating game in general to get good at.
Yeah,
But
dealing with random spawns in that way is really stressful because you could be on a good run and all it would take is enemies spawning in a really inopportune time. You're trying to climb a tree, for instance, and an enemy spawns at just the right time to be able to nab you. That could really make a big play, really kill off a good run.
yeah, so if you want to learn a new game, only 2 people have ever speedrun it. At least on the speedrun.com leaderboard, and I would recommend checking it out. Any last thoughts about either of these speedruns?
I think that they both, at least at face value, seem like really straightforward speedruns. So, if you're looking for something relatively easy to pick up, it looks like Bart versus the World is probably the sort of game you could learn in an evening. Bart versus or Escape from Camp Deadly is probably the sort of game that, with a day or 2 of practice, you could probably put up pretty decent runs. So I would say, leverage the fact that all the routing's been done for both of these games and that they seem relatively simple. And if bad game speedruns appeal to you, these seem like pretty good candidates. I'm actually considering picking up both of these at some point.
Yeah, I'll say not as an insult to either world record holder, but these aren't fully optimized for sure. You see parts.
Yeah,
where
neither of the runs are perfect.
Yeah, they take damage when they're not supposed to, which loses time. There's some mistakes. So I know there's a death in Bart versus the World that I'm not sure if it was intentional or not. I couldn't tell because it was so early in the screen. It might have been, but there's definitely room for improvement. So if you really like helping optimize the time, but you don't necessarily excel in routing something, the work's been done for you, which is good.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take one more break, and then we're going to actually be able to answer some live Q&A here. Yeah, so this is kind of the whole reason we do this live sometimes, and so if you like us doing it live, then I encourage you to ask us questions so that we keep doing it live in the future.
We'll give it about a minute if anyone has any more questions they want to throw in. So the questions don't just have to be about Simpsons. They can be about speedrunning in general. I mean, we get questions of all types that we've answered in the past. And I think at this point, we've actually been fairly removed from Q&A. We haven't done a lot of Q&A recently. So I actually don't see any harm in us even answering questions that we may have seen before. So
yeah, it's been a while.
So we'll give it about a minute, and
then we'll start with what we have. And
if you got any questions, yeah, we'll try to grab questions as we see them while we're doing Q&A. So if you think of them as we're talking, feel free to shout them out, and we'll try to get them in. There's no guarantees that we'll see every one of them, but wired ducks, that's a good start. Man, that's a lot to unpack with that question. Why are they? All right, well, I mean, we can get started now. I mean, in general, 2 questions is perfectly fine. But if you got any more that you want to shout out, feel free to shout them out.
Personal questions, whatever you got.
Nothing too personal.
We'll just ignore it.
Yeah, I won't answer questions about my anything.
Okay, you want me to?
All right, I'll start off.
Okay.
All right, so we're very fortunate to be able to do this episode today live on John Carl's stream, and so part of that is that we are taking live Q&A directly from his chat. So this is a rare opportunity that we get. We've done some episodes on Retro Gaming Live in the past where we've had pretty good live Q&A, and this hopefully will be all the same. So to start off with, we got a question from Kamikaze Cracker, and he asks, if you could place the Simpsons characters into an existing game, which game or game type would you most like to see them in? So this is actually a pretty interesting question, and I'm going to start off with stealing what I'm certain is John's answer, because he mentioned this earlier about there having not been a South Park Stick of Truth equivalent in the Simpsons
There
universe.
might be that I don't know about. If there is, tell me. I mean, I'm not...
I think this game, I think The Simpsons could make for a pretty decent RPG, I guess is the takeaway.
Yeah.
And likewise, following along with the South Park games, I think that the world thinks that they want more XCOM style games, and they just do not. If Mario plus Rabbids for the Switch taught us anything as a society, it's that we actually don't need more XCOM style tactical games. We're pretty good on what we've got already.
I thought
So
people liked that game. What do you throwing some shade?
maybe. I'm
People
saying the
liked it.
genre. I'm saying I do
Yeah.
like that game. I'm just saying the genre. We probably don't need any more of it. I think we're good for a little while.
Okay.
So, um,
Yeah, I mean, I would say open world, similar to something like Stick of Truth, would maybe RPG style, maybe more Grand Theft Auto style. Like Hit and Ride is mostly about driving, I think, right? I mean, it's kind of more Crazy Taxi than it is Grand Theft Auto. Am I wrong?
no, it's definitely Grand Theft Auto. It's
Okay.
definitely drive to a location. Some of them are like destroy this other car that's on the road that's
Sure.
trying to get away, or go to the power plant and do some mission inside the power plant or something like
So
that.
I need to check out that game first of all.
It's super cool.
I do own it, so but I would say it would be fun to have Simpsons sports games similar of like Mega Man Soccer.
Okay.
Like Super Mario Strikers, like, you take all these other, there's enough characters to throw in there to have different abilities and different things. I think that'd be kind of neat to have in
Hey,
there.
if Winnie the Pooh got Home Run Derby, then I think Simpsons deserves its time to shine.
Oh, I think I'm thinking of Road Rage. I think that was a different style game. So I need to check out Hit and Run. I do have it. So, but yeah, that would be cool.
Apparently there's a lot
along
of
with
them we're
RPG.
not aware of. Road Rage, Simpsons the movie game, in addition to Hit and Run.
Yeah.
So yeah, it looks like there's a lot of games in that sort of more open world style, which I think is great. I think that really gives the Simpsons their opportunity to shine.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sitting on the edge of my seat looking for a Simpsons game to play, so that's why I probably wouldn't know what came out like. But if I were to play some an existing game, I think that'd be interesting. Sockhat Abe asks us, with all the mess Simpsons games early, why do you think the very enjoyable arcade version never got ports for the big consoles of the time, especially given the success of the Turtles arcade?
The only thing I can assume is that it must have been too hard to port. That's the only guess I have.
There had to be technical reasons, or
I mean, the port
something.
of Turtles in Time from the arcade version definitely dumbed down Turtles in Time. Maybe they just weren't willing to make the sacrifices necessary.
It might have also been like the year that it came out. When did Simpsons Arcade come out? That's because like
And I can
Turtles
look
in
that up
Time
while
was
you're
later. Turtles in Time was later on. It was 91. Yeah, so it would have had to be ported to the NES and not the SNES. So I'm thinking the technical limitations had to be a big part. I mean, they were able to
91 was the first year of the SNES, though. It was available.
That's true. That's true. I didn't think of that. I keep thinking of SNES being more like 93, 94. So
Yeah, that's what makes these games so crazy for the Simpsons games is
They're
that these
later
were late in the NES cycle.
and they're
Like
really
they
bad.
have no excuse
Yeah,
for being
they're
this
really bad. Yeah. I mean, 91 is early in the Game Boy cycle, which is kind of confusing and weird, but Game Boy was 89. So, a little bit more excusable, but yeah, I don't know. It had to have been technical limitations. Like
There's
that's the only thing I
there's
can think of.
comment in the chat that actually sounds pretty reasonable. It says that the arcade game was made by Konami and Acclaim had the Simpsons license for console.
Yeah.
That definitely could have played a big
I was
part
gonna
of
say
it.
licensing as well. That makes sense. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think we would have had a lot of fun with a SNES Simpsons game. I think it would be, up there with
Well,
Turtles in Time and stuff.
We got two SNES Simpsons games, and
Oh,
let me
beat
tell
'em
you,
up. I mean, the
we-
arcade game.
we were not missing much on that front.
Well,
I mean,
Simpsons
Bart's
Bart's
Nightmare and what was it? Bart's Nightmare and
I didn't know there was a second one.
Someone will say it in chat. I don't remember. Bart's Nightmare and the other one.
And the other one. We'll figure that
the
out.
well-known other one.
Canon Bevco asks us, what do you think these games get right, if anything?
I mean, Bart versus the World is a super competent platformer. It's just not a good one. Oh, Virtual Bart's the other SNES one.
Virtual Bart. Yeah, I actually even own that too.
It's a competent platformer. It does platforming fine. It just doesn't make an interesting game out of it. Like
I'll say the Game Boy game I think is interesting and fun. It puts the Simpsons in a setting that you would believe them to be in, unlike Bart vs. the World, but still different from like a lot of Simpsons episodes. I think the sound sample's good with the Eat My Shorts. I think the graphics look decent in that game. Like I find a decent bit of charm in Escape from Camp Deadly. Bart vs. the World, I'd say the trivia is fun and it's a nice little addition to something. You know, when it came out to see who was the biggest Simpsons fan who could know the answers.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's about it. I mean, I wouldn't say they did a lot right, or we would have given better ratings.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to praise them when we just got done not rating either of them above a 5.
Like, even the things they got right, I think a lot of those things are expected to be right, rather than like something they should get praise for. Like making a platformer in 1991 on the NES shouldn't be a difficult thing. You have literally hundreds of examples to build off of. So,
Exactly.
BD Weasel asks us, Game Boy question. I saw some Game Boy Pockets for sale the other day. $30, worth the purchase. I would say look up, this is just a general collecting question we don't talk about much. Go to pricecharting.com. That's a good place to check the prices of games and stuff and compare to what they sell for on eBay. Maybe sounds a little high, but if you want a Game Boy Pocket, get it. It's not
Yeah, especially if it's the color you're looking for and you're having a hard time finding it.
Yeah, or if it's in good condition or something. You know, I recommend springing a bit more and trying to get a backlit Game Boy Pocket or well, you can only get front-lit Game Boy Colors, but a backlit Game Boy Pocket would be really sweet. I think that's worth the money because if you have not played on an original Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color since they came out, it's almost impossible in 2017. It's so dim, and you're just going to be like, why is this happening? Yeah, it's just frustrating. You're just like, what? It makes no sense. You're so used to looking at your iPhone and stuff with this bright screen, so that's my recommendation.
So King of Here asks, this season Stranger Things 2 featured the games Dig Dug and Dragon's Lair. Which game should they feature in season 3 circa 1985?
Did you watch Did you watch Stranger Things?
I haven't yet. Actually,
either season?
No, I have a cousin who works on Stranger Things 2, and I keep telling myself I need to
He works on it? What does he do?
She's a set dresser, set designer for... It's shot in Atlanta, so...
Stranger Things is amazing. It's so good.
Yeah.
I love Stranger Things. I love Stranger Things 2.
It.
A lot of people didn't like Stranger Things 2, but I loved it.
Anyway, I looked it up. The only 1985 game I personally care about is a little-known Famicom game by the title of Dragon Buster. It's pretty fantastic. It was in the arcade. It was pretty solid.
What about like Higemaru Makajima? Wasn't there an arcade game of that?
Yeah, but I think that was 87.
Oh, too early. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just saying Dragon Buster, it's a solid title. I think that the Stranger Things staff should get to me. I've already got my in. I got the connection. I just got to get my foot in the door. This is my chance to get into Hollywood.
I could clearly do something like Mario or show the NES coming out because I think the earlier episodes, like these 2 seasons, were pre-1985 because they're really excited about getting an Atari, which makes me think it's probably like 81 or something. Like,
right.
So, you know, Dragon's Lair was really popular like earlier 80s, so I don't think the next season of Stranger Things would be 85. I think it'd be a lot sooner. So I don't have enough arcade knowledge. If I had thought of this question beforehand, I'd be Googling it like Chad is and finding some good stuff, but I got nothing. I got nothing. But it'd be cool to see the NES released on Stranger Things.
Yeah, that's true. If it would
Duck
be cool
Hunt,
to see
Duck Hunt or something
like that featured in
Mike Tyson's Punch Out in the arcade, maybe. You know.
What year did the NES drop in North America?
85.
85. Okay. Yeah, and that would have been the same year with Mario 1 and the Mario Bros. Port of the arcade game. So Mario Bros. The arcade game could have probably been a decent feature.
Good too. Yeah. And so I think that's our Q&A for this episode. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and listening to us live. If you guys are looking for other episodes or other content from us, you can go to www.theframesavers.com. It has links to all of our different sites, places you can listen to us. You can find our Twitter there. You can find a link to our Discord to hang out. That's typically where we get most of our Q&A when we're not doing live episodes. And if you're looking for posts about when we're posting episodes, when maybe they're delayed, stuff like that. Twitter and Discord are the best place to go. Where can they find you, Chad?
You can find me at Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Author Blues. Where can they find you though?
Can find me on Twitch and Twitter at John Carls, and on YouTube as John Carls1. Also, please give a follow to B Morgs TV at Twitter or Twitch. He is our producer, and he makes these episodes sound great. I want to give a huge shout out to our $25 a month patrons. If you go to www.patreon.com/theframesavers, you can support us financially. These two people give us $25 a month. We thank them so much because, we have to pay for a bunch of fees and stuff like that. And so we don't really pocket this money. It's really helpful. www.twitch.tv/TinaHacks. She does SMW. She does Final Fantasy VI. She does the Dragon's Trap for Switch. She'll be running that at AGDQ coming up. Give her a follow. She's a really great variety speedrunner and just a really awesome person. If you listen to the Mystic Quest episode that Chad just did, he talked about her. They did a blind race of that, so she's a good friend of ours. Also check out our boy Mr. Pzak. That's twitch.tv/MRPZAK. He does retro speedrunning stuff. He's done a bunch of NES things like Mickey Mouse Capade and stuff. So please go check him out. Any last thoughts, Chad?
I wish there were more good Simpsons games, and because I don't know how good the modern ones are, I think I'm going to try to find an excuse to play Hit and Run sometime soon.
My last thought is Simpsons Soccer. Make it happen. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next episode. Later.
Peace.